like I said, my name is Gordon Ross. I'm the president of DeVoe and Company. We are an investment banking consulting firm that focuses on the RIA space. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus on two questions that we probably get asked the most, in particular on the buyer and the seller side. As buyers, there's lots of people trying to buy RIAs right now. The M&A activity is definitely not slowing down. We're going to talk about that. And there's lots of buyers out there, lots of new people entering the industry. So if you're a buyer, how do you stand out from the crowd? We get asked that an awful lot. On the second side of things, on the seller side of things, if you are looking to sell your RIA or at least take on a minority investor, how do you ensure that that transaction process, how do you ensure that due diligence process and negotiating process works as best as possible? So we're going to jump into a number of things on that front. We're going to focus in around 5 kind of key action item areas, and some of them are going to focus on the buyer, some of them are going to focus on the sellers. So we're going to start off with this concept. I want to introduce this concept of how you future-proof your firm. And this is mainly geared towards the buyers. So I want to make it very clear that in terms of the goal here is for you to become a destination firm that people want to associate themselves with. As the industry evolves, there's lots of people out there with big checkbooks. There's lots of people out there that can write a nice check for a company. The way you set yourself apart is you become that destination firm that firms want to associate themselves with. And I'll talk a little bit about that in detail. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time on the first one. Second point is on growth as a differentiator. That's going to focus on both buyers and sellers. We're then going to talk about building out the right support team for your transaction. That's on the seller side of things. And then we're going to talk about being innovative in deal positioning. And then lastly, we're going to talk about using talent as the ultimate driver. And that's for both buyers and sellers. But to start off with, quick advert for DeVoe and Company. So we have 3 divisions of our business. We have an investment banking division where we help people buy and sell firms. We have a valuation side of our business. So if you need your company valued professionally, perhaps on like an annual basis, maybe you've taken on like a minority investor, we can definitely help there. And then we have a consulting side of our business, and that tends to focus on things like succession planning, equity structuring, compensation structuring. If any of this is of interest to you, we'd love to talk to you further. Okay. So let's jump into this first point and this concept of how you become that kind of destination firm and how you future-proof your organization. Well, to start off with, it's important to have an idea of where the industry is right now. And I've been here for the 3 days, been asked an awful lot of like where we see the M&A space right now. Have we reached a kind of valuation bubble? Have we reached, are things beginning to cool down? Personally, I would view that the valuation side of things have begun to kind of cool down a little bit, and frankly, they had to. Some of the deals perhaps were being irresponsible. But from a transaction point of view, that has definitely not slowed down, and I don't see it slowing down. You can see here, Q4 2021, we saw a peak in the market in terms of number of deals being done. Then things began to slow down a little bit. We had COVID, we had higher interest rates. But then over the last 3 quarters, we've seen new peaks in terms of number of deals being done. So there's more and more buyers and sellers out there. We don't think that's going to slow down. If you just think about the number of RIAs out there that don't have succession planning and things like that, we don't see that slowing down. And then the challenge here is if you're an RIA, you're facing an awful lot of competition. This is, by the way, this is from our deal book, our quarterly deal book that we send out. This shows the composition of who's completing the deals, who's buying the firms. And you can see that consolidators, they're not slowing down at all. They're continuing to do an awful lot of deals. You've got people coming in from outside the industry. You've got people like international investors, sovereign wealth funds, private equity. There's an awful lot of quite competitive buyers in there. And RIAs are in the middle and being squeezed a little bit in terms of the deals being completed. So if you're an RIA and you're looking to complete deals, how do you stand out from the crowd on that front? And I want to introduce this concept to you of this destination firm and how do you become that firm where people want to associate with you. And in order to stand out like that, it's important to really understand, like, okay, where are we as an industry right now, and what do the next 5 years look like? because that's then going to dictate how you stand out and how you dominate in the next 5 years as a competitive buyer, right? And in particular, you can just go to the next slide, there we go. In particular, in our industry, you hear an awful lot about the word disruption, right? How the wealth management industry is being disrupted. And in particular, over the last 10 years, you've had new entrants, new RIAs come into the market, and they've disrupted the incumbent firms like wirehouses and things like that. And you could argue that maybe technology is coming in again and disrupting the industry as well. And so it's important to kind of understand, okay, where are we in that journey? Where are we in that disruption journey? And the good thing is that if you actually look at academic research into disruption, there's actually an awful lot of consensus in how to analyze an industry when it comes to disruption. And most academics agree that there's 6 different stages when it comes to disruption. Stage 1 is market entry, the new entrants come in. Stage 2 is adoption and growth. They survive and they begin to grow. Stage 3 is market expansion and scaling. They start to grow and they start to become large, dominant firms. Stage 4 is when the incumbents wake up. You see resistance and competition. The incumbents wake up and they start to compete hard against the new entrants coming in. Stage 5 is establishing or consolidate. Basically, the incumbents, they give up trying to compete and they start buying up the competitors and they start buying up the new entrants. A really good example of that is in the car industry and rental industry with Zipcar. The incumbent rental companies competed hard with Zipcar for many, many years, and in the end, they just gave up and Avis bought Zipcar, I think about like 5 years ago. And then lastly, you have stage 6, which is continued evolution and innovation. Academics actually call that the innovator's curse, whereby the new entrants come in, they grow and they become large, and they might actually become too large, and they become too slow, and they stop innovating. And then a new round of entrants come in and actually disrupt them. So if we look at this, where are we? And why am I talking about this? Because depending on where we are here in this journey will dictate how you compete as an acquirer going forward. So the good news is that there's actually some very specific tests where you can tell where you are in an industry. The professor that came up with disruption theory was a guy called Clayton Christensen. He was out of Harvard. He wrote a book in the 80s called The Innovator's Dilemma. Strongly recommend everybody read it. And he had 2 tests to prove whether an industry was fully disrupted or not. Test number 1 was the consumer's preferences have changed. The consumer's preferences have been disrupted by the actions of the new entrants. So a really good example of that is like the airline industry, right? God help me, I'm flying home in Spirit Airlines, right? 30, 40 years ago, when I got on a plane, I would get a glass of champagne, right? In a glass. Now I'm flying home, I'll be lucky if I don't get punched in the face. But I'm okay with that because I'm flying home for $30. My preferences as a consumer have changed. Test number 2 is that the incumbent firms have changed their behavior because of the new entrants. Their behavior has been disrupted. So coming back to the airline industry, the legacy carriers, Delta, United, all of them, they've changed their service now. If I go on an American Airlines flight, I'm not getting a glass of champagne anymore. So if we apply this to the wealth management industry, where are we? And what would full disruption look like in the wealth management industry? So if we look on the consumer side of things, if the consumers have been disrupted, what would that look like? I would argue that would mean that we would have national RIA brands and we would have main street recognition. Are we there yet? No, not really. If I was to stop a passerby on PCH on the street out there and ask them to name a wealth management firm, I'm willing to bet that they would name a wirehouse. You might disagree with me, but I don't think we're there yet in terms of having a national RIA brand. And we need to have, we would also see true understanding of what real independence means in the consumer base. And are we there yet? No, I don't think we are. A really good example of this is I was talking to an advisor recently, and they had just landed a new client. And the new client was actually a young soccer player for one of the MLS franchises. And the soccer player had just signed their first big money contract. And the soccer franchise actually allocated that advisor, allocated a financial advisor to that client. The problem was the financial advisor was actually a rep at a well-known insurance company, and that advisor tried to sell an 18-year-old with no assets an insurance policy. Now, you and I both know that's complete BS, but the soccer player didn't know that, and the person out on PCH doesn't know that either. So we've got a long way to go in terms of education. And then lastly, employment seekers would state a preference for independence when they join the job market. Is that happening now? Maybe, maybe not. You know, if you're a young person joining this industry, I still think an awful lot of people join the big warehouses because they just don't know any better, and they don't have that level of education. On the incumbent side of things, are the incumbents fully disrupted now? What would that look like? Well, you'd have warehouses offering products to RIAs. Do we have that? Yeah, we do. We've got warehouses here today trying to market their products. Warehouses would start offering custody services to RIAs. Do we have that? Yeah, we're starting to see it. Goldman Sachs are here today selling their custody services to RIAs. Will other warehouses follow? We'll see. Warehouses would start, they'd give up trying to compete, and they'd start buying RIAs, and they'd start creating RIA divisions. Do we see that yet? No, but I will tell you at DeVoe, we get contacted by firms all the time trying to buy RIAs, and we've been contacted by every single warehouse. Every single warehouse is figuring out how to buy RIAs and how to be competitive in that marketplace. So we'll see. And then warehouses are no longer tying advice and product and custody together. Are we there yet? No, we're not. So if you ask me, I think we're only in phase 3. I think we've got stages 4, 5, and 6 still to go. And why am I talking about this an awful lot? It's because in order to be a good acquirer, you need to dominate in phases 4, 5, and 6. So what does that look like? So on the consumer side of things, how do you dominate there? Well, it's this concept of building that national RIA brand, and I'll go into detail on how I feel you should do that in a moment. But we also feel we need to lead the way on the education of the public of true meaning of independence. Like I said, there's that lack of education in the consumer base. Now, here's the scary part. Nobody else is going to do it for us. It's up to RIAs themselves to lead that education. Nobody else is going to do it. The custodians, they're not going to do it. They're in a dogfight with each other in a very competitive marketplace. You've got industry bodies like the CFP board and stuff like that are trying their best, but they're relatively small organizations. It's going to be up to the actual RIAs themselves to actually lead that education. And then you need to use G2 advisor education as a clear differentiator in your value proposition to acquiring firms. If you have a fantastic G2 advisor base already in place and you're able to slot that in under aging advisors that you're buying, that's extremely attractive. On the incumbent side of things and being disrupted and then beginning to offer their services, this is where RIAs can really begin to stand out because most RIAs are employee owned, and so you can now be nimble. You can actually make decisions. You can try out new service offerings. You can try out new technology. There's so many vendors here today that are creating fantastic client experience technology. And if you're an RIA, you can be nimble, you can test things out, you can switch out bad technology. What I'm getting at is that there's really no excuse anymore for having a poor client experience when it comes to technology. And why is this important when we talk about a destination firm and a destination brand? I was 10 years at Dynasty. We used to help people launch RIAs, and now I'm at DeVoe where I'm helping people sell their RIAs, right? The point in the deal where everybody in the room knew that the deal was done was when the person selling the firm or the person wanting to launch the firm would realize that their client experience would be better at the destination. They would be better at the acquiring firm. Once you're able to prove that, the deal is done. I've seen it every single week of my career. Last point on this whole kind of national RIA, it's a bit of a throwaway line, so I want to go deep on this just really quickly and be very clear on what I'm talking about here. And I think it's important to kind of think about like an action plan by like people, structure, and execution. So on the people front, we talked about recruiting that next gen of advisors. We talked about being very active in the M&A world, having dedicated people in your team focusing on RIA. You also want to make sure that the growth of the company is no longer dependent on just a few people. You've got several sources of growth. On the structure side of things, you need access to capital. If you don't have it, there are lots of people that would gladly talk to you about that. You need cohesive management structure across locations. And you need scalability of process and clear management of processes and workflows across multiple locations. On the execution point of view, you need integration support within your in-house. If you're buying another firm and you're buying an advisor and you're bringing them on board, who's actually handling that? Who's actually managing that? You need dedicated staff. And then last point here is this concept of investing into marketing and having a clear national marketing strategy. And I think this now means that we have to have a difficult conversation about client experience and investment strategy and how to build a P&L. If you look at most benchmarking studies across the industry, most of them show that RIAs spend somewhere between 2 to 4% of their revenue on marketing. Isn't that really low? Particularly if we're talking about building a national brand, it probably needs to be higher than that. So, okay, and if we all agree on that and we want to keep profitability margins the same, where are we going to cut from in order to spend more on marketing? And I think we have to have a difficult conversation about client experience and investment strategy. So if I was to take an RIA and I was to do a survey of their firm and ask them, like, a survey of their clients and ask them, like, why are you with that firm as a client? I'm willing to bet that they would probably say something like client experience, relationship, trust, the bond that they've built with their advisor. I don't think they're going to talk about investment strategies. They're not going to say this advisor bought Coke for me one time instead of Pepsi and it worked out really well. So if I'm building an RIA and I'm building a P&L, where am I spending my money? Am I spending it on an expensive in-house investment team? I feel that's maybe outdated thinking. Particularly when there's thousands of options in terms of outsourced investment solutions, and many of them are here today. Perhaps that money should be going to how you build a client experience and how you build a national brand. Okay, let's move on. Next action step is using growth as a differentiator, and this is actually focused on both the buyers and the sellers. So everybody knows, this is fairly obvious, that if you want to get your company valued more, the easiest way to do it is for it to be a fast-growing firm. That's fairly obvious, but I don't think many people understand the numbers here. What we've seen at DeVoe across all the deals that we've been involved in is that if you are able to show 1% growth, a 1% increase in organic growth and net new asset growth, at least a 7% increase in the valuation of your company. It's a 7x multiplier. Now, over the years, why are people looking to do deals? Why are people to grow inorganically? On the buying side of things, it's always been for growth and the fact that people are wanting to do acquisitions to grow. That's been the same for years. What's new is this one. Sellers are now saying that one of the reasons, and here the biggest reason this year, that they're looking to sell their business is because they feel they can grow more at a larger firm or a firm with a different platform. That's never happened before. That's different. And so we're evolving as an industry now. 5, 10 years ago, if you were selling your firm, you might be saying, okay, who can give me the biggest check? Now it's, okay, everybody can give me a good check. What can they do for me after the deal is done? How will they help me grow after the deal is done? And if you're a buyer, you need to show that you can do that in order to be a competitive buyer. And that can be through a number of different ways. It can be through marketing, it can be through acquisitions, it can be through succession planning, but you have to have a clear offering there in order to be competitive. At DeVoe, we do an awful lot of consulting on the growth side of things. We have an offering that we call our growth diagnostic. You can download it actually here on this QR code. We look at 6 key areas when we're analyzing like why a firm isn't growing. We look at growth strategy, we look at unique value proposition, we look at target client profile, client referrals, referrals from professionals, and digital marketing. If you don't have a clear strategy for each one of those areas in your business, that's probably a bit of a limiting factor for you. Okay, action step number 3, building the right support team. This is if you're a seller, if you're looking to sell your RIA. How do you ensure that's it ends up being a successful transaction? Now, the good news for me here is that if you look at the number of deals across the industry, only 29% of deals across the industry actually involve an investment banker. The good news for me is that that's up 10% on last year, but it's actually, I feel it's still a relatively small number, only 29%. And deals are extremely complicated. I'll go into detail in a minute, but you're dealing with an awful lot of conflicting factors here. And the point I want to make here is that, and you might feel this is a self-serving advert, but if you take one thing from today, is that if you're looking to sell your firm, please use an investment banker. You don't have to use us. We'd love if you did, but use one of our competitors if you have to. Please do not go this alone, because it is extremely complicated. First of all, there's a wide range of buyers out there. You've got private equity, you've got international investors, you've got sovereign wealth funds, you've got consolidators, you've got other RIAs. All of them have their own motivations, they have their own things that they're trying to get out of the deal. It's really complicated. And also, how do you get your name out there to all these different channels? Also, and I think it's more of like an emotional factor here, this is your life's work we're talking about. You have spent decades building this organization, and then right at the point of sale, you maybe sell to the first person that calls you, or you don't have the right advisors on your side to help you through this process. And I feel the industry is evolving, and we're maybe beginning to see enough bad deals come out where people are maybe 1-2 years after the deal, and they don't feel happy with the deal, and it could have been done better. You need help in this process, because doing a transaction is very complicated. You've got different valuation methodologies. You've got different earn-out structures. You've got different branding considerations. It's very complicated. And our goal at DeVoe is to be your Sherpa. Our goal is to be your Tenzing Norgay. We want to help you reach the top of that mountain, and for it to be the best day of your career. The scary part is it can also be the most vulnerable day of your career, but we want to be by your side. Okay, action step number 4, be innovative in deal positioning. I'm going to skip over these 2 slides in the interest of time, but I want to talk about this slide here, where if you're a buyer, what does it mean to be M&A ready? So a little bit of a behind-the-curtain secret, we get approached by people looking to buy other companies all the time. And actually, quite a lot of the time, we push back. We actually tell people, you're not ready. You need to do some work in-house in order to be M&A ready. What does it mean? Well, this is a good checklist to have in the back of your mind. Do you have an advisor transition team in-house? How are you going to transfer the assets across? Do you have a defined diligence process if you're analyzing one firm against another? Do you have that growth value proposition? Remember what I talked about, how are you going to help firms grow once they come on board? What does your infrastructure look like, and what does your infrastructure philosophy look like? So if you're buying my firm and I have different technology to yours, what's going to happen to my technology? There's no right or wrong answer there, but you have to have a clear strategy in place. What does the career path alignment look like for G2? If you're buying my firm and I've got really great G2 advisors, what's going to happen to them? How are they going to develop from here on in? And then do you have a dedicated business development team? If you're trying to grow in this area and you don't have people dedicated to the business development side of things, you're probably behind your competition on this, because your competition is well organized. Last point on this, and this is a relatively new thing, some firms have started to get really innovative. I think this is really cool about how they position a deal when it comes to the person selling the organization. Kind of one of the things we don't really talk about as an industry is if we see a deal fall through at the last moment, it's often because the person selling the deal is extremely nervous about what their personal life will look like after the deal gets done. And some people want a purpose in life. Some people don't want to retire. Some people want to continue working. Some people hate golf. They hate fishing. They want a life after the deal gets through. Lean into that. Use that to your advantage. Be innovative in what you can do. Carve out a clearly defined role for the person selling the organization. There's lots of things they can do. They can sit on board seats. They can be special advisors. They can even be special advisors to some of your clients if they're business owners themselves, and maybe they're thinking about selling their business. And they can be client ambassadors to help you with business development. All right, last one from me is using talent as an ultimate driver. This is very much, we've talked an awful lot about G2 advisors today, so how do you build out that G2 advisor base? And what's the key things? And the scary thing here is that it's not gonna take much to really stand out. This comes from our human capital survey. We actually just released this recently. 28% of people said last year that attrition was higher than expected. That's pretty scary. And what's even more scary, if I move to the next slide, 44% of firms say that if they were to have to transfer from G1 advisors to G2 advisors right now, the transition would be bumpy. Think about that. That means that 44% of the industry are saying that their succession planning isn't really well executed. That's quite scary. And only 39% of firms are saying that they have adequate training in place for G2. So what does it mean to build out this structure and build out that G2 kind of training base? Well, first of all, you have to have adequate training. There's lots of training solutions out there, whether it be financial planning, business development, client coverage. There's lots of really, and the training industry is beginning to catch up with the RIA industry. There's some really good providers out there. You also have to be, if I can move to the next slide. You also have to be really thoughtful in how you're hiring, and in particular, be proactive in your hiring. This slide is showing that less and less firms are planning ahead on their hiring. They're not hiring before they need it. And this is basically saying that most RIAs aren't really doing forward projection planning. Think about your company as it goes forward. If you were to increase your AUM by 20%, how many people would you need and in what role? By 40%, how many people would you need and what would that org chart look like? Be proactive in the planning process there. And also, on your career pathing, have it clearly articulated. Only 38% of firms say that they have a clearly articulated career path for the younger advisors. If I come on board at your firm as an associate, what does the next 10 years of my career look like? You need to have that clearly documented, and for it to be again, building out that destination home, you want people to be associated with your company long term. Okay. So in recap, we've talked about a number of things today. We talked about future-proofing your firm and becoming that destination firm. We've talked about using growth as a differentiator, building the right support team for your transaction, be innovative in deal positioning, using talent as the ultimate driver, and hopefully these things really hit home for you. Last thing from me, if any of this was of interest to you, you can download these 2 QR codes. The one on the left goes to our M&A deal book. It basically gives us all our M&A data on a quarterly basis. It's the white paper we put out. And then the one on the right is how to contact us if you'd like to talk further. But thank you so much, guys. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and safe journey back home, everybody.